Hello, everyone. This is Ben Coleman coming to you from Lakeland, the Green Swamp Aerodrome, and this is Plane Time. We always come through with some really compelling guys and gals, and today's no different. Today we have Robert DeLaurentis, otherwise known as the Zen Pilot, and we've been tracking Robert through his escapade here around the globe. And Robert, welcome to Plane Time.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I bet you didn't know it was going to take 8 months when you started tracking the adventure.
Well, you got kind of trapped a little bit, if you would say that. And I guess you were in Spain when you when everything hit and kind of put the skids on your trip.
Yeah, I had just departed from Italy, and 2 days after that, they shut Italy down. I got to Spain, and about a month later, they shut it down. So I'd been traveling around, enjoying some of the different sites. And they shut it down actually when I was in a monastery in Montserrat, living with the monks. And because the monks were so old and at risk, I got, pushed out. And I ended up in a beautiful place in Spain called Sitges, overlooking the ocean, the old city. And, quite honestly, it was the perfect place for me because we had gone looking for peace in the world. And somebody had told us we need to start with ourselves. So I had about a month and a half to really work on that, in meditation, silence, and a space of gratitude as well.
Well, I guess, Robert, we're all guilty of reaching into this computerized age, and we want everything yesterday. And oh my God, I had to wait 5 minutes for this program to respond. It's just 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And but on the big scale of things, the citizen of the world, and hopefully Obi can drop in a picture of your Turbine Commander 900. And I guess she's been performing okay for you, but what's the old saying? What could go wrong? Tell us about your trip from when you left Spain and coming over the Alps, and kind of your route of flight in the citizen of the world.
Okay. First of all, the citizen of the world, I'm actually quite pleased with the performance because when we started to modify the aircraft, it was stressing out different components. And the old saying that things fail in the first 10% and the last 10% of their life was very true. So once I finally got on the road, so to speak, headed south towards the South Pole, the plane actually became quite reliable. And on this trip, we've had a starter generator fail and a hydraulic leak on a brake caliper, which was minor. And we were able to fix those in Sweden. There was a shop that had 3 turbine commanders, and they were kind enough to help me out. And we're actually able to locate a starter generator in Denmark. So that was pretty lucky. But yeah, from Spain, I headed up into Sweden because Sweden was a place that wasn't really under restrictions. They were practicing herd immunity, and it gave me the opportunity to continue flying to keep my skills up in preparation for the North Pole crossing. And ideally, I would have left from Svalbard, Norway, which is just to the north of Sweden. But we made a couple requests, and the CAA, sort of their FAA, gave me permission, but the government would not, because the island of Svalbard did not have any medical facilities. And they were concerned that if I flew in and brought something in, they'd have to evacuate the island. We also looked at possibly leaving from Iceland, but eventually I ended up just simply leaving from northern Sweden, a place called Kiruna. And I had enough range to do that, but I was trying to minimize the distance because I knew the 18-hour flight over the South Pole is very challenging. And if I could drop this flight from 10 to 8 hours, that was certainly worth doing with an extra leg. We had continuing challenges with the fuel tanks because I had a second tank burst in Malmo, Sweden. And luckily, I was a little more adept at redirecting the fuel and dealing with that. And the seam that burst was not spraying it in my face, literally in my eyes, like the second burst tank that we had. So we took that tank out, we had it rewelded, but I had lost faith in the remaining 3 aluminum tanks because, you know, 2 of the 4 had burst, and we had repaired 1, so I had the 3 left. So I decided to make use of the bladder and fill the other tanks up just part way, and then the one that had been repaired, I could get it all the way, you know, full. But so eventually the decision was made that I would leave from northern Sweden. It would be a 10-hour flight. And, you know, leading up to the departure, things went really smoothly. You know how usually before you leave, there's always a surprise? Well, that wasn't happening. In fact, the exact opposite was happening. Things were falling into place perfectly. So, you know, the taxi showed up on time. He was able to take me on the tarmac to the plane. I had some issues with waypoints, and the morning of, they worked perfectly. The plane didn't have any leaks, you know, no fuel, no hydraulic fluid, no oil. Oxygen supply was still full. Nitrogen was full. Struts were good. And the weather, you know, was pretty reasonable in terms of for the entire trip. Departure, I had a few clouds. The airport was supposed to be closed, but they granted me permission to fly out early, and they even showed up early at the tower to open it for me. No charge, you know, so this was starting to feel pretty good. So I took off, and Svalbard was about 2 hours away. I had good comms. I was above the cloud layer. And as I got beyond Svalbard, that's when things started to change.
Well, now, wait a minute, Robert, everything is roses. I mean, what could go wrong?
You know, what could go wrong? And my friends who are fairly intuitive were telling me this was going to be a good flight. And so I was feeling pretty positive. I was well rested. The plane was climbing fast. You know, everything was perfect. So I lost communications with Svalbard. I shifted to my HF radio, and I got nothing, which, you know, honestly wasn't that much of a surprise because it was daylight and the propagation is not as good during the day. I knew my antenna was a little bit short, and it had only worked really once on the trip. So after trying that for about a half hour, I shifted to my satellite phone, trying to get a hold of Oceanic Control. And they would answer, but I could not hear a word they were saying. And I just assumed they could not hear me. And I was at a wrong way altitude. So, you know, they didn't care initially because there were no planes out there. It was really just me, especially over that route. And, you know, with the COVID and fewer flights. So I continued on my way. And when I had crossed the South Pole, things started to get a little bit crazy about 75 nautical miles from the pole. But in this case, I lost my 2 flight management systems, which are just, you know, complex GPS units, about 150 nautical miles out.
Wow.
And I knew from experience that they would go out and then come back. And it was not that the equipment was bad, it was that I was losing the satellite signal. So they were not recovering. Eventually they did, but it was very slow. So, you know, at that point, I'm on my iPad, right? And then, you know, the iPad always worked reliably for me. Over the South Pole, it never went out once, and it was still doing its thing. So at that point, I lost my ADOHARS, which is the Attitude Heading and Reference System.
Right.
So I had no track. And it was funny because as I was watching the GPS units, they showed the plane with the nose pointed in the wrong direction, going backwards along the track. And then one would, you know, change, and then it'd go back, and the other one would change. So I was just ignoring that information. And once the ADOHARS went out and I lost my heading, the autopilot went out too. And it put the plane in a right bank. And, you know, I'm fighting the autopilot, and thank God in the Turbine Commander, you can overpower the autopilot. Because in those 737 Maxes, it's not possible, right?
Right.
So I'm fighting the autopilot. I'm hitting, you know, the yoke cutoff switch. It beeps, but it doesn't work. So then I push the button on the autopilot to disconnect it, and still nothing. You know, at this point, I'm starting to get a little bit nervous. I do have a visual horizon because I'm above the clouds. And then I reach over and I pull the circuit breaker, and then it, you know, it writes.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm breathing a little hard. I have a bunch of extra fuel. So I shift and I look down to the directional gyro, which I had set, and I'm flying, the track, and I start to shut systems down and try and repower them up, hoping that that will, get the systems working. And the ADAHRS can't reinitialize because it needs 2 minutes of just steady, flight. So every
Right.
time the plane, does a little bounce, it goes offline again.
And
So
what was your altitude now, Robert?
I was at 30,000 feet, the runway altitude still.
Okay.
And eventually I would descend to 29,000 so that I was at a correct altitude, because I was concerned that maybe, Svalbard didn't pass my altitude correctly to oceanic. And then I think it's Gander, or and there's another one I think called Bird now. But so I went down to 29. I figured I had less of a chance of, hitting another plane. And at that point I thought, well, I think I might have to hand fly, because I had to at that point. So
Sure.
the plane is not supposed to be hand flown at RVSM altitudes, right? But I was doing my best and, flying the plane like you're always instructed to do. And eventually when I shut down the autopilot a few times, I realized that I could get it to hold altitude and I could get it to steer a heading but not change. So I set it up on the correct heading. But what I had ahead of me was, of course, the true North Pole, the magnetic North Pole, and then the North Pole of inaccessibility. And I wanted to cross those 3 poles. I mean, I had been planning for this. So what I did is I hand flew the plane for that distance, which was about 200 nautical miles. And the funny thing was I had a tremendous tailwind. So I was kicking along at one point at about 343 knots, which is about 390 miles per hour. So almost 400 miles an hour out of a turboprop, which I thought was amazing, And as I would look down, it was just a solid layer of clouds, but there were slight breaks in the clouds when I was moving past these 3 North Poles. So I did get to see a little bit of the terrain down below. The problem was it was all water and ice. So it wasn't like there was a solid patch of, ice that you could land if you needed to. If you were going down, you were probably going into the water and the ice. So that didn't really make me feel any better. And, after I sort of fought it through the North Pole of inaccessibility, I was thinking, well, the system should come back online anytime now, because at the South Pole, once I got about 50 to 75 nautical miles away, it was miraculous. Okay, now everything works again. So I continued to fly. My iPhone even failed twice, which I don't know why, because I was doing some filming and it's usually very reliable. But that iPad was rock solid. And to my surprise, the systems didn't come on for another 5 hours. So I was bouncing back and forth between hand flying, using the autopilot, on a heading, and kind of concerned because I thought if this iPad is not correct, I could be doing circles out here, and eventually I'm just going to run myself out of fuel. But luckily the iPad was correct, and I continued on all the way to Prudhoe Bay.
Wow.
And when I got over Prudhoe Bay, it was supposed to be broken clouds, but it was fogged in. They had 300-foot ceilings. And technically I could have done an instrument approach in to, the minimums. But I thought, it's been, at that point it was about 9 hours because I had that tailwind really pushing me along. And I made the decision to continue on to Fairbanks, which was another hour and a half away, which would put me at about 10 and a half hours in the air.
In decent weather at Fairbanks.
Yes, severe clear at Fairbanks. So that was sort of comforting. And the other thing that was sort of confusing matters was I had called up Customs and Border Patrol the day before, because when I filed my EAPIS to get into the United States, Prudhoe Bay wasn't listed as an option. So I was able to call up, got the director, and said, hey, I'd like to land in Prudhoe Bay because I'm coming all the way from Sweden over the North Pole. And, it's going to be a fatiguing flight. Fuel's a concern, weather, mechanical issues potentially.
Mhm.
And he said, no, you can't do that. If you land there, I'm going to arrest you. I'm going to impound your plane. I'm going to severely fine you. So I was, kind of shocked to say the least. I said, look, aviation is an unpredictable thing. We have weather, especially over the pole in a vast distance like that. And then there's always mechanical issues. I can't, I may not be able to do that. He goes, well, you should have planned better. And I was like, okay, and I knew it wasn't an argument I was going to win.
No.
And there was no reason to get this guy upset. So I said, okay, I understand what you're saying, but let me tell you, I'm also going to do what's best for my life and my safety.
Mhm.
He goes, well, that's your choice. So, I hung up a little more frustrated. And surprisingly, he called me back about 2 hours later. And he said, I got your EAPIS report, and I'm going to allow you to overnight in Prudhoe Bay, but you need to call me when you land. And then the next day, you need to immediately get to Fairbanks.
Oh.
So he cut me a break, which was very nice. And that was one of the things that I was talking about fell into place.
Good.
So
Good.
I had a sense of relief. But, very challenging flight to not have those systems online and be searching for a heading, for that long a period of time. And the directional gyro I knew would work for a time, but, that degrades too. And,
Well, that was my question. My question on your magnetic compass. What was that doing through all of this?
Nothing really. I was expecting it, to spin, but it would go from north to 030 and back. And I was expecting a wider range. And I was told, I think the word was declination, because the declination was so high at the pole that may have been the problem. And I was thinking, well, maybe my magnetic compass doesn't work, because it should have been saying 0 or 180, right?
After you went over.
Yeah. So it doesn't. So I need to have that looked at.
So even after you got down into Alaska, it still would not point south.
No.
Huh.
So, think about it, Ben. You have information coming from the magnetic compass that's off.
That's the most reliable instrument in the aircraft, we've all been told.
And then the GPS units. And then I had an ES600, which was used for radar display, but I could put a track on it. And that actually had the plane going in the right direction. And then I had my directional gyro. And then the iPad. And none of them completely agreed. So, I would ask everybody who's listening, what would you do? Because I just was trying to figure out if there was some redundancy, which there wasn't really. And then there was the iPad that just seemed flawless,
Well, what do you trust? Because, you're scooting along at 400 miles an hour, roughly across the ground. And if you happen to be going the wrong direction, you can go the wrong direction really quick at that speed. And that's the anxious moments is what I like to use, is anxious. And panic, of course, when your instrument started telling you falsehoods, that's a perfect scenario for vertigo.
Right.
And people can get vertigo in beautiful, clear blue sky. If it messes with your mind and your inner ear.
Right.
But it takes a lot of determination on your point. And above all, it didn't sound like you panicked. It sounded like you were on the cusp of getting a little concerned. But you didn't panic, obviously, because we're talking here. If you'd panicked, we probably wouldn't be able to talk to you right now.
I had a few F-bomb moments. I'll be honest about that.
Yeah.
But, if you look at the North Pole, there's not really a landmass anywhere around there. So once you're there, it's not like you have an option, that's close and easy. So, I think it was a point of faith, really. You're doing everything that you can think of. I did have one more fallback position. My inReach satellite texting device was working reliably with about a 15-minute delay. So what I was thinking about doing is sending a message to my handler, Eddie Gould from General Aviation Support, saying, hey, am I headed in the right direction? Do I need to adjust my course?
Yeah.
And later when I looked at the track on the InReach Explorer, it didn't show any of the diversions for the magnetic or North Pole of inaccessibility. So, that was probably a 30, 40 degree course change. So if it didn't show that, I wasn't sure how accurate it would be, but I figured he could at least maybe get me pointed in the right direction, but I'd never done that before. And I don't know how often that's been used for navigation, so.
Well, Robert, as you're talking to me, I've been noticing something over your right shoulder there. What is that I'm looking at?
I thought you were going to say you noticed a nervous twitch.
No, I'm going to leave you alone for now, but we'll come back and visit that. But what's that over your shoulder?
Yeah, this is the Explorers Club flag, and it's number 44, which is one of the oldest ones that's still in existence. And they award those to flag expeditions because my trip is truly a polar expedition per the State Department, the National Science Foundation, and the EPA. So this particular flag behind me has been to the North Pole, the South Pole, the bottom of the Marianas Trench, and the top of Everest. Now, some of them have actually been to the moon because some of the explorers are astronauts. So it's a great honor, and because I had 2 experiments, one was a wafer-scale spaceship for NASA, and the other one was through the Scripps Institute of Oceanography testing for microfibers in the atmosphere. I was awarded that flag, so I'll take it back and I'll deliver it back to New York City where the headquarters is. But it's a great honor, and you can see that this thing has been through a bit, right? It's not in the best shape.
Well, I'd be concerned if it looked like it just came out of a box, but
no, that thing's got some miles on it, that's for sure.
Well,
so yeah, great honor to fly with the flag, and make this as historic as I think it is. Really,
it's very commendable. Okay,
yeah.
now you get to Fairbanks, and a little sigh of relief, maybe. Good to get back on the ground, and I think I've even got a picture of you getting down and kissing the tarmac.
Okay. I was relieved in many ways because there I was, in terra firma, but I was also concerned because I had been hearing rumors that things were getting a little bit tougher in the U.S., that, the quarantines were getting a little more restrictive than they had been. And, I still have about a month to go, but Europe was a very enjoyable place for me, especially Sweden, because they focus on cooperation and not competition like we have here in the United States, and very relaxed. I think in Sweden, I saw maybe 6 masks on in the first week that I was there. One of them was on the ground. The other 5 were on people. And then after that, nothing, absolutely nothing.
Wow.
And people were happy and just living their normal lives. But the funny thing was, people started to come out to the plane. They recognized it. And one of the people was a lady named Wendy who owned the airport pizza parlor. So she invited me and the 2 film crew that had showed up to go up for, lunch. So we're sitting up there eating pizza for me the first time in about 8 months, American pizza. And I'm looking down at the plane and it was very surreal, because everything seemed normal again. And the plane looked good, like it always, did on the tarmac. And I kept thinking to myself, my God, that plane just went over, the 3 North Poles. And, I'm thinking back to all the things that had transpired. And I still am having a little bit of a hard time accepting the fact that, that like happened. It seems like too much,
Is it, would that, and I can't rob any of your words, but it sounds almost like a Zen moment.
Yeah, very Zen, and what you realize is that the world, you come back and the world is pretty consistent in many ways, but it's actually you that's changed, and your perspective has changed. So, you add to that the fact that I've had so many challenges along the way. I mean, it's been one after another, just nonstop. And, it's like getting back home, like, where's home?
Yeah.
Right? Because I started, after about 5 months of being away from San Diego, I just started forgetting about my routine, the comfort of the place where I lived. I'd get up in the morning and do this, or go to this restaurant, or hang out with these friends. That was all kind of gone, and had been replaced with these new experiences. So I felt like I had become a citizen of the world, which was the name of the plane, of course.
Well, and I guess home is probably where we are in our mind at the moment.
Right.
And that's I appreciate that. I do.
Yeah.
The
And, oh, go ahead.
No, yeah. So as you sit there in Anchorage, you're reflecting and you're kind of combining your notes, any photographs, or you should write. You should probably write some of this down.
I'm about 2/3 of the way into the fourth book, which is called Peace Pilot to the Ends of the Earth and Beyond. And that's the same name for the 10-part docuseries. And we have 6 episodes rough cut and submitted to Discovery for review. Now, we don't know if they're going to take the series, but they just bought out a portion of the Explorers Club for about $20 million. So they have a major, investment in that. And we think it's partially because they wanted to get great content for their, documentaries and programs. So the docuseries actually is a unique combination of the excitement and the challenge of the polar circumnavigation and the records that were sent, but also, the spiritual component of the trip, the interviews with people we did along the way to show that there were more similarities than differences amongst people. And then the travel, because there's some amazing, scenery, paragliding in Rio, over the beaches and the mountains there, by the Christ Redeemer, stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Can I take a sip of water real fast?
Sure, go ahead. This is casual, but the problems that I see, Robert, the only thing that sometimes messes up this the beauty of the world are us.
Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out how we can all get along. And from your perspective, you've seen here recently a lot of the different aspects of the world, literally.
Right.
And we're just trying to, here at the Florida Aviation Network, give you as much exposure, and hopefully people will listen to your plight and kind of get something from it, and have an inner peace movement inside themselves. And it's contagious. We talked about this before, how your enthusiasm and your passion, it can engage other people to hopefully not get an exact like mind, but at least think about things a little bit, do the right thing, be upstanding, do unto others, the whole tamale of how we get along.
Yeah, and Ben, it's interesting too, because aviation becomes a vehicle for that message. You've got the Citabria behind you, but we're talking about concepts and messages, and it's really aviation that's sort of buoying, those messages along. And, for us, it was always about connecting the South Pole with the North Pole, the two places on the planet where peace has always existed, and everybody in between. And when you think about those two polarities, they pretty much zero out when they're connected. And we're hoping that the same is true eventually for the world, right? Because there's all these polarities in the world, right? You have black and white in the US, which is a very hot topic right now, but you have all the disagreements between the countries at a time when I think everybody should be working together. The borders are firm and people are not, they're restricted in their travels. And it's quite clear that I don't believe any one person, company, or country will have the whole solution to our coronavirus issue. No. So, in a very metaphoric way, the plane is connecting those poles, and we're showing by interviewing so many different types of people that everyone is really more similar than different. They're talking about love, family, compassion, safety, health, happiness. I mean, that's being human. That's what everybody wants. So when you add in politics and religion and the financial piece of it, that just takes us away from our humanity in many ways. So we're hoping we're showing the world, but not just talking about it.
Well, and another reason that we like to talk with you on this, and hope to share it with all of our viewers and anyone else that has an interest in it. And I know that you have a lot of information coming out that you will share, and Obi will drop in behind us, or in front of us or over us, how to reach you, and we've got that on file. But I tell you what, Robert, is there anything you're right now? You're sitting in Anchorage, Alaska, and the airplane's relaxing. Everything's you're in that Zen moment. When do you leave to go back home, wherever home is?
Yeah, I'm going to leave probably around the 23rd. And that you're right, the plane is very comfortable. It's at the museum here in Anchorage. And, it's gated in. People are loving on it, seeing the plane. I've had a few interviews out there, so it's a very happy aircraft right now. The intention is next to fly to Haines, Alaska, and do some bush flying.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully in a plane as cool as yours. And
wheels on it.
What's that? With wheels?
Wheels on it, I'm sure.
Yeah, we did a de Havilland DH, I think it's a DHC2 yesterday, to the glacier. And that was some spectacular footage we got. So I'm really happy to share that very soon with people. But yeah, so I'll do some backcountry flying for the first time. And we're supposed to spend the night out in the wilderness. So that should be pretty cool.
Well, you haven't lived until you landed on a riverbank. I'm sure you'll be doing that out there.
I hope so. There's a very experienced pilot that'll be flying us around. So I don't know which plane he's going to be in or be using, because he has a few. And with the camera crew, we'll probably have something closer to a 207 or something like that. Is it 207 or 206?
206 usually is what they use. Okay. There are a few of the 207s, but the 206 is more prevalent. Okay. Of course, we wish they were in air vans, but a little self-serving plug for the Gips Aero air van there.
Okay.
They're up in Natrum Air. They do bear sighting, sightseeing tours up there. Mm-hmm. But there's so much aviation in Alaska. It's you're going to have fun now. But I tell you what, the flying over those glaciers will really get your attention, particularly in a single-engine airplane.
Sure.
I mean, if anything was to happen, you go down on a glacier, you're likely going to get hurt, because those things are sharp.
Yeah. Luckily, on the flight, there's some water right in front of it. So I was talking with the pilot actually, and he said, "Well, we'll go down there if we have to." But those radial engines have been around for a long time, so I don't know if that makes them more reliable or less reliable.
But Robert, hey, we're just along for the ride. If it happens, we deal with it. If it don't, great. I mean, we don't want to do anything to encourage the engine to falter, but if it does, and when it does, and they will, you just deal with it as best you can. A friend of mine, the Zen Pilot, taught me that.
Oh, really? Well, it sounds like a wise person. Hopefully he's had a lot of experience to back that up.
Well, I think we're looking at him, and again, you look a little more older and wiser here today after your flight across the North Poles, all three of them.
There's a factor that I call cumulative fatigue, and it's the sort of thing where it just builds until you're completed. It's kind of like getting ready for a final exam. Mm-hmm. Like you can go on a little vacation here or take some time off, but until it's done, it's not truly done. And I still need to make it back to San Diego, which is a lot more enjoyable flying. And I certainly have my commitments to the 90 sponsors, but we're making it happen. So
well, good. We'll try to get a list of all those sponsors and give them some credit as well.
Okay. Right.
Robert, is there anything else you'd like to share with us today? And of course, we will be talking to you when you get to what you call home. Right. But anything else you want to share?
Yeah, I'd just like to remind people, that through all the challenges, there's opportunities. And even though this trip went from 4 or 5 months to 9 months, we decided to stick with the mission and not come home. and, you know, continue to push forward. And I think we've done a pretty good job of making it happen. And my hope is that that will inspire people to go after whatever their, you know, individual personal dreams are. We call it the impossibly big dream. And I like to think that we've shown people that just with persistence over time, you know, it can become reality. And we hope that we inspire some people along the way, and that they go and pursue their dreams as well.
Well, and we encourage that as usual, and do it safely. And you, by demonstration, you have done this trip safely. But there's been some hiccups in the road, but that's just all part of dealing with the things that happen.
Yeah.
Well, Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're just going to kind of head out, and I'm just going to kind of stop the interview at this point. But again, thank you, and on behalf of the Florida Aviation Network and all of the volunteers. And it's always good talking to you. Thanks,
Yeah.
Robert.
Thank you so much.